All right. Well, I'm Bob O'Connor, and my rank at the end of the war was flying officer, and my regimental number was J45418, and I guess that was be all of the information that you need.
So where did you grow up, Bob, and then maybe how you enlisted? And
Well, I was born in Red Deer, Alberta, just 100 miles north of Calgary here. And when I was about 6 months old, we moved up. My father got a job up in northern BC, north of Prince Rupert, on the coast. And at that time, it was a big mining and smelting operation at a town called Antioch, which was, I believe, it was an Indian name meaning shining mountain. And we lived up there for until I was 6 years old, a little over 6 years old, when my father was killed in a mining accident. And we decided to move back to Alberta, to Red Deer, and we went out on a farm in 1931 and spent practically all of the 30s on this farm, which was out west of Leduc, and that was an experience. It was if there was such a thing as the Ozarks in Canada, that part of the country would have qualified for that.
is that would the closest town be Leduc then, or
No,
would it be another?
the closest town was a little town called Breton, about 50 miles west of Leduc. And so we lived and farmed there until the war came along, and the Second World War. And I was I was just 15 the day before Canada declared war. And so I was going to high school at that point, and I went into Red Deer to live with my grandmother and go to high school. And so in 1940, they decided that they were going to start up an air cadet thing. And before the actual official startup of the air cadets was in the spring of 1941, but we sort of jumped the gun in Red Deer, and we had a startup of a group there, and when the official start came, I believe we were either the first or the second air cadet squadron formed in Western Canada. It was number 7 Penhold Squadron. That was the air service flying training school, which was run by the Royal Air Force, just about 9 miles south of Red Deer. And the RAF were very good to us. They would supply, once every 2 weeks we would go down for an evening to number 36 SFTS, and the RAF would give us lay on instructors, and we got excellent training, and then in the intervening times we would have do training exercises in Red Deer. But the Penhole Squadron was, Red Deer wasn't big enough to have a full-size squadron, so there was one flight was in Innisfail, and another flight in Rocky Mountain House, and 2 flights in Red Deer. These various, they would have in intervening period between those 2-week periods of going down to Penhole, we would do our separate things. And so my uncles were very involved in the militia back in the 30s, and so we used to see them, watch them go at the armories, and we would see them do marching, things like that. So I was quite knowledgeable about this, so I quickly was made a sergeant and in one of the flights, and shortly thereafter I was promoted to flight sergeant, which meant that you were in charge of about 40 or 50 young boys.
So, Bob, in your training, are you actually using aircraft, or is it more ground?
Well,
what are you doing?
It was all ground. We didn't, in the early days, it wasn't until after the war that they began to train. So if you became proficient enough and passed exams and things like that, then you would qualify to get free flying training, actually up to a private license, which at that time was you had to have 35 hours, I believe it was, of dual instruction and solo flying, and so that was. During wartime, we did a little bit of flying training in link trainers, which were an early sort of simulator that was. They had these down at Penhole, and so if they would have time, they put you in the link trainer, give you a little practice with trying to fly the thing. And the link trainer was a very tricky and very sensitive thing. You usually ended up going into a spin and crashing. But at any rate, it was good training. And
so in 1939, how old are you? How old are you when you enter the cadets before you actually sign up?
So from 16.
You're 16, and then when you sign up, how old are you?
You could start or you could sign up in the Air Force at 17 and a half if you had parental permission. Now you couldn't start your actual flying training until you were 18. You'd have to do just ground duties for the first 6 months, and then you could actually start your flying training. That was if you had qualified, you had a good enough physical. They're very strict as to your qualifications, and also you had to be at least grade 11 standards. Usually they like to have at least high school matriculation, and that was so. I wasn't available. Well, I was in the spring of 1942, about the time that picture was taken of the group in Penhall, and that was, I was 17 and a half, but when I wanted to join the Air Force at that time, I had 3 uncles that were in the artillery, and my brother was in the Air Force, but he had to quit school when he was finished grade 7 to work on the farm, and so he couldn't qualify for aircrew, and he later did remuster, and when they were getting short of aircrew, if you could pass the physical exam and the IQ test, they would send you to give you a crash course at one of the universities to bring you up to a grade junior matriculation, which is grade 11, and so which he did, and he ended up as an air gunner, and he got his commission, but he didn't get overseas because the war ended before he was on waiting for the next boat to go overseas.
So Bob, that picture you're referring to, I think the caption of it's a group picture in front of an Anson aircraft. Is it at Fort McLeod?
Yes.
I think it's it. So you did travel out of the Red Deer area down for this is cadet training.
That was a 2-week camp, and they did all through the summer. They sent different squadrons down to different airfields, and you got pretty good, what Air Force life, everything was going to be like.
Okay. So maybe we can move to your enlistment and then your training. So
yes.
If you can, like, where did you enlist, and then the formal?
I enlisted in Edmonton, and the training program was filled up at that time, so they said, you just go home and wait for your call up. So that's what I did, and they gave me quite a large badge there, like it was a roundel, and so that at least people knew when you're coming up to 18, well, so everybody expected you to be in one of the services, and so that was just your badge to say that you were in the Air Force, but you hadn't been called up yet. So.
Did you feel a lot of pressure? Like, what types of pressure did you feel from the community about your having to sign up a bit, or feeling a pressure you have to sign up? Is that what you're kind of saying?
No, I don't. There didn't seem to be any pressure. Everybody wanted, and of course, if you had the qualifications, and everybody, of course, wanted to join up and be a pilot. And so that was, but you didn't know until you actually got in there and started your training what they were going to decide what you were going to do. While I was in Air Cadets, I got kind of interested in navigation, and so I was, when I actually got to my official training in the Air Force, we had, with being an Air Cadet for 2 years, it was when you went to Manning Depot, you knew all the tricks of the trade and how to march and everything that for ground crew thing. That would last for Air Cadets just a month initiation, and then you went across the river to Edmonton to the University of Alberta, which was taken over by the Air Force, and and we were there for 12 weeks doing ground studies. And at the end of 6 weeks, you had an interim or midterm exam. And up until that point, I was still going to be trained as a pilot. But I made the mistake of leading the course, and out of 145 fellows, I was top of navigation. And that settled what I was going to be. Because 2 days later, after the marks were given, the MO called me up and said, "There's something wrong with your eyes. I don't think you could land an aircraft. There's something wrong with the muscle balance in your eyes." And it wasn't. But at any rate,
you could read a navigation chart, but you couldn't see an airplane land, eh?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So at any rate, and so I decided if I was going to be a navigator, I was going to be one of the best. And so when I graduated that course, you had you were divided up into groups, and if you had a plus 90% average, you would qualify to be what they call a navigator bombardier. And this was the old training of the First World War, where you were a navigator. Well, you were everything. You were just two in a plane. There was a pilot and what they called an observer. And so the observer had this single wing with an O on it. And so that was the top of the line. And if you had a 75% average, you could be a straight navigator. And if you had a 65% average, you could be a bomb aimer. And if you had a 50% average, you could be a pilot. So we always used to joke with the pilots that they were the dumbest of the lot. And but everybody wanted to be a pilot just to say. But at any rate, I started my training down east at Mountain View, Ontario, just outside of Belleville. We did our bombing and gunnery there, and that was an 8-week course. And when you graduated from there, you were sent down. There were only 2 schools in Canada that trained the navigator bombardiers, and one was in just outside of Quebec, Annecy-Lorette, just outside of Quebec City, and the other one was Chatham, New Brunswick. And most of the fellows that went to Annecy and Lorette were RAF fellows, and the Canadians went to Chatham, New Brunswick. But at any rate, there was we had 6 of the 26 in our course. We had 6 British fellows and 20 Canadians, and that was a 5-month course, 20 weeks, and it was, well, you were there for just a little less than 5 months, and then you, if you passed all your exams and everything, you got your wings, and you're ready to whatever they decided to do with you from there on. Usually the guy that led the course when you got your wings, he would be sent as an instructor. And So you tried to avoid that. Nobody wanted to be an instructor. So, but at any rate, and then the next 6 guys would go to general reconnaissance in Summerside, Prince Edward Island, and that would lead you into going on to Coastal Command, because you had to be a pretty good navigator on Coastal Command. You're out there over the water for sometimes as much as 15 hours or something. You can make a lot of mistakes and trying to find your way home. And so the rest of us went straight overseas. I was supposed to go to the GR course, but I didn't want to go to Coastal Command, and and another fellow had just got married, and he wanted to go to Coastal Command, so we went to our instructor and said, could we sort of change the marks a little bit? And he fiddled our marks, and so this chap, Carl Command, he went to Summerside and I went overseas. So that kept us both happy.
So Bob, in your training, I was going to kind of get to ask you about if you can think of like what were some kind of happy highlights, and then what were some things that maybe were a little bit negative too, like was anyone killed in accidents or things like that? So could you maybe think a second about what would be, say, a happy something about training that you was a neat memory or anecdote or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we had at bombing and gunnery school. We had 26 in our course, and we had some British guys and we had Canadian, and so at one time when you flew in 2 different types of aircraft when you were at bombing and gunnery school. If you're doing your bombing practice, you did it in an Anson, which was a good old aircraft, very stable and everything, and your air gunnery was done in a Mark IV Blenheim, which was at the very beginning of the war, was one of the first of the light bombers. But they soon became obsolete, and they were used as gunnery. And when you were sent up on a gunnery exercise, they sent 3 trainees up in the aircraft. So you'd have a pilot, a gunnery instructor, and 3 students. And so you each were given 200 rounds of ammunition in your belt. You just hung around your neck, and you would, and each one of them, in order to be able to keep score, they would dip the end of the bullets into a different colored paint, red, green, or just plain. And this was so, when because on that exercise you'd shoot off your 200 rounds. And the next guy would get into the turret and he'd shoot off his. And so with that little paint blob on the thing, when it went through the drogue, which was a canvas sleeve that was about 25 feet long and about this big around, and it would be pulled by with 300 yards, it was about 300 yards. It would be behind the drogue that was pulling it, and you'd fly along this way and you'd be firing across to. So when you dropped the drone, and they counted up the number of shots, or how many were green, how many were red, and how many were just plain holes. And so you got marked for that. But the Blenheim had and I don't know why they didn't put a plywood thing over there for safety, a hatch right beside the turret where you were moving around, and one guy would be in the turret, he'd fire off, and then he'd get out, and they used to say, don't step down on that door, because there's a safety catch on it, and you, with your big flying boots or something like that, you push the safety catch, and the door open, and out you'd go. And and of course,
would they have had parachutes on?
Oh yeah, but you didn't have the parachute hooked on, because
yeah.
you had your parachute harness, and it was on, and it had all the things came right here, and just right around your belly button, there were, all the various straps came together into a big knob there, and it was you had to turn the knob 90 degrees and bang it with your fist, and then the whole thing would come apart. And then you had your parachute was in a receptacle on the side with just a couple of bungee cords holding it in place. So if you were going to jump, you had to reach out, get your parachute, click it onto your harness. And I wasn't with this fellow, but we had this one little guy from a little cockney from London, and he was quite fat, and so of course his nickname was Tubby. And it was lucky it was Tubby that did, because when they were switching positions on the thing, Tubby stepped down on that door, and the door opened. Down Tubby went, and fortunately, being fat, the big buckle on the front here caught on the front of the hatch, and just slowed him down fast enough. The other guy reached out and grabbed him before he went out, because otherwise he would have gone there. But I came down, I was in a different aircraft, and I came down, I guess, a few minutes later, and Tubby, and so I went back to the barracks and to take off my flying stuff, and Tubby was sitting there on the edge of his bunk, and he was, my bunk was, I had a bottom bunk on one side of the alley, and he just across there. Old Tubby was sitting there, and he was walking back and forth. He's just as white as your shirt. I think he sat there, and he didn't, all he could do was sit there and swear. But at any rate, he survived the course, and the other sort of savvy thing was we lost. They were coming in. This was a gunnery exercise in one of the bowling ropes. Well, that was the bowling rope that Tubby was in too. But at any rate, they were coming into land, and they gave him, for some reason, they gave him the red always lamp. That was meant you were to overshoot. Bolingbroke had these Bristol engines, which were good engines, but they were they had a kind of a strange engine, and you couldn't, if you tried to open the throttle too fast, it would tend to oil up and quit. That was, pretty, a dangerous situation, but at any rate, when the pilot got this red lamp, he pushed the throttle over to, and the port engine quit. And of course, all of your, when you were flying, when you were coming into land, if you had to overshoot, you go, and you would always turn left, unless there was some reason. But that was sort of standard procedure, and that was the engine that quit on him, and he shouldn't have turned. He should have turned to the right with his good engine, and of course he turned into his dead engine, just down the thing, and they were all killed.
Oh, that's sad.
Did you see any of that, Bob, or did you see the wreckage?
No, we didn't actually, but we almost got court-martialed because we happened to be duty flight that night, and the orderly officer was, he wasn't very up on his job actually, and he was going to make us go out and guard the wreck, and we refused. So that was, fortunately the CO heard about this, and he countermanded the order, so we didn't have to.
So why didn't you want to guard the wreck, Bob? Why were you?
Well,
did
it
you
was off the aerodrome, you see, and it was about a half a mile off the aerodrome, and so they just wanted to make sure that nobody was there taking anything off the track.
And you didn't want to have to be there where your friends had just been killed. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah. But that's and when we got to, we never had any problems at all at Chatham. I don't think 5 months there we never had a crash. So,
on a happier note, you're in Quebec at the time?
no, we're in Chatham, New Brunswick.
New Brunswick. Oh, how was your social life with the local people, or did you go to dances or
Oh
anything
yeah,
like that?
we went and everything. But while you were training, you were there was always lots of girls around, and they'd come to the air, and on the weekends we'd have dances and everything, and the local girls would come in, but we were always on the move, so very few liaisons ever came to fruition.
Did you want to take a break, Bob, for a drink or anything? You want to take a break?
It's fine.
So at this stage, how do you get chosen then to go overseas now? So you're at the stage where you're finished your training?
Yeah. Well, as I say, you're told where you're going to go, and that's it. We did a little fiddling with, and our instructor was good enough to allow us to do that, and so we got to do what we wanted to do. But most of the time, they said you're going here, you go there.
So when did you leave Canada? When are you, like, how do you leave Canada to go overseas, or is that?
Well, then you go down to, once you've had your depart, or your leave after you had a 2-week leave period, and then you go down to well, they kept moving it around, but when we were going down, we went to Lachine, just outside of Quebec City, And we were just there 3 days, and the ship was ready, and so got on the train and went down to Halifax and got on the ship and got on one, I guess about noon, and sometime that night we pulled out, and when we woke up in the morning we were at sea, and we just went, the big troop ships are very fast and they could outrun any of the submarines or anything like that. So they just head off and crank them up and get going as fast as they could, probably do about 25 knots or something like that. And they just go by themselves and zigzag around.
Do you remember?
You didn't go in the
name?
convoys.
No, no, you just went by yourself.
Do you remember the name of the ship, Bob? Or?
Yeah, the Empress of Scotland was a CPR boat.
Was it armed? Remember if I had...
They had a few small guns on them, but if they'd have run into a battleship, it would be a disaster.
So do you recall any memorable events on the ship?
Well,
Or?
only about, I can't just remember exactly when it was, but I think it took us 6 days to get across. And about the third day or something, and we started to slow down, and we stopped. We shut off the engine. There we sat out in the middle of the ocean for about 6 hours, and they never told us why or anything like that. I guess there must have been a U-boat somewhere in the area, and I guess they waited until, I guess, the U-boat cleared out and we started up again, and away we went. That was the only strange thing that happened on us on the way out.
And then what would be the procedure once you docked, and then how did
Yeah.
you get assigned to your squadron?
Well, you still had some training to do over the. See, you had these older aircraft were the training aircraft, and now you were going to get into the more powerful, faster ones. And so usually what you did, they would, when you got over to Britain, right on the south coast, a city called Bournemouth was the reception depot for the Canadian Air Force. And usually you'd land either in Liverpool or up in Scotland somewhere, and get on the train down to Bournemouth at what we would just got overseas just as the invasion was taking place. So we had they had moved the Air Force out of Bournemouth because the Army needed all the accommodation along the south coast.
And which invasion are you referring to?
The D-Day invasion.
Oh, you arrived just as D-Day
Yeah.
was occurring.
So you're in June 6th, 1944?
Yeah.
And about how old are you then, Bob, again?
I was 19.
You're 19, okay.
It was from the time I started actually my training. It was 11 months till I got my wings. So by the time I had and we got overseas, it was a little over a year actually, and then we had what they called advanced flying, which really we could have done without actually, but they decided that we need to get used to flying in Britain, which was entirely different than what it was like in Canada. Like here in Canada, especially away from the coast or anything, there was no fog or anything like that. It was good flying weather all the time. That's why they had the big British Commonwealth Air Training Plan here in Canada, was just for that reason. It was a long ways away from the actual fighting, and the weather was good. So this is why they decided to use Canada as the big training base. So that was when you finished your advanced flying, which we did in Northern Ireland, and we would fly around the Irish Sea and up into the Hebrides, and that was the weather was entirely different, because now it was winter. It was getting to be winter time, and an awful lot of fog and bad.
What aircraft are you using in Vaughan?
Well, actually, at advanced flying in Northern Ireland, we took a step back, actually, when we were training down in Chatham, New Brunswick. The old Anson, which was one of the main training plane for navigator, they were started to build new ones in Winnipeg, and they were much better than the old Anson, because they're built like a mosquito out of plywood, and they handled much more nicely, and they were warm. The old Ansons were drafty and cold, and couldn't. You had to nail your charts down on it, otherwise there's many sliding windows on the thing. But if you didn't have your thing pinned down, then wind would hit it, and the way it was going, you were sitting no charts. And so at any rate, it was they were using the old Mark I Ansons, which were really, they kept them running anyway. We didn't lose any more. And that was about a two-month course. And just at Christmas time, we got 4 days leave and got back to the aerodrome, and they said, "You're posted." And we said, "Where to?" And he said, "Oh, some place called Upper Hayford, which is just outside Oxford." And we said, "Oh, what kind of aircraft do they fly there?" "We don't know." So we just got on the train, went down to Upper Hayford, and couldn't believe our good luck when we saw all these mosquitoes sitting on the aerodrome. And that was...
So you'd been flying those old, you got back into the old Ansons again in the training, and then all of a sudden you got to mosquitoes. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So then we had about 3 months training on the mosquitoes, and then we went to a squadron. So we were only on a squadron for about 3 months.
Would that be an OTU? Would that be an operational training squadron? Okay. So then what did you think of the Mosquito, Bob, as an aircraft? What were the good things? What were the not so good things? Can you think about that, or?
Well, there wasn't any not good things. But it's just, it was a tremendous aircraft. It was a beautiful aircraft, and it just, it could do anything, and do it superbly well.
Okay. So could you talk a little bit about, is it RAF, it's 627 Squadron
Yeah.
you're opposed to? Could you, and you're at, is it Woodhall Spa?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about like when you first got there and your experiences there?
Well, of course, as soon as we got there, it was, well, when we finished we were at the end of the OTU at Upper Hayford. I guess we had, then that was where they chose which squadron you're to go to. And I think there was something like, I think we had 25 crews at OTU. At first month that we were there, we flew with a different pilot every day, and until we'd flown with them all. And so then we were told to, this one day they said, okay, you go down to the flights and the pilots' names will be listed there. And the navigators were to pick their pilots. And so we went down. For some reason, I don't know why, I was the last one to go down, and I had this one fellow that I had flown with, and I really liked him. And we'd had a real good flight, and so I said, you know, if I get the chance, that's the guy I'm going to choose. And so I got down there and looked down the list, and the corporal was there, and I said, what happened to Flight Lieutenant Hutchison? And he was a fellow from Pine Falls, Manitoba. And so then he looked up on board. I said, did he get washed out? And no. And there was a big table up against the wall, against the blackboard. And the corporal had thrown some, what they call daily routine orders. There was a big sheet and it curled up against the side of the blackboard and blacked out Hutch's name. So I said, I'll take him.
So nobody had signed up with him yet?
No, because his name, the DROs had curled up against the blackboard and blanked his name out, and nobody had bothered to check. And I asked, I said, what happened to him? So that was a lucky break. So that was how we got crewed up, and it was a good choice.
Did you stay together for the duration of the war?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I had meant to say that when we finished up at OTU and were being assigned to squadrons, as I say, we had about 25 crews, and during that time at OTU, we had one crash, and Mosquito was taking off on a night exercise, and we were just coming home. We were in the circuit, getting ready to land, and we saw this suddenly big streak of fire along the ground, and it was, I don't know what happened. We never did find out, but it was a Mosquito taking off. Something happened and they crashed. A long streak of flame on the thing, and it burst into flames.
Was the crew lost?
Yes.
During that time, Was there ever any signs for you guys of enemy bombing or V-1s or V-2 rockets or in your area that you were in?
No,
Was there?
no. We, well, I should say there was still the odd intruder would come in, but we were, a group of the fellows were out one night, and I wasn't with this group, but I guess they were coming back from the pub or something, and it had this little, I think there was 4 of them in this little mini car, and a German night fighter was an intruder. Well, I guess saw them traveling. You had to have a little bit of light on them to see where the road was, and I guess this intruder, he took a pass at them, and the fellow drove off, and they hit the curb and took all 4 wheels off. The guy, he just made one pass, and that was it. I guess the lights went out on the car, so, so that was our only thing with the thing. But at any rate, when we came to, we had about 25 crews in our course, and the 3 that crews that were chosen for Pathfinders was Hutch and I and 2 other fellows from, and they were both classmates of mine. And so that was, I guess the training must have been pretty good in Canada, because we have the 3 crews that were chosen out of the 25 to be Pathfinders were all, the navigators were all in my class.
Wow. So can you describe arriving at 627 and being with the Pathfinder group, like maybe your first mission?
Yeah.
Or?
Well, yeah, of course you had. When we got there, we did our marking in a kind of a unique way. It was we used to do our marking by dive bombing, and we would be circling the target at about 5,000 feet, and as soon as the lead, whoever saw the aiming point first, should say that we worked in conjunction with the Lancaster Squadron. The Lancaster Squadron had this radar equipment called H2S, and H2S would send a beam down to the ground, and it would get an echo back, and with your cathode ray tube was about that big around, and it just gave, it would show up the echo. If it hit water, it would show up differently. If it would land, ground, and it would show differently. And if it was built up area like a city or something like that, it would show differently. So that it actually, like the H, would show like just like a kind of a rough map. Actually, what you know, was fuzzy and everything, but it was you could pick out the major things. So that Lancaster Squadron would go to some place near the target, pick a spot, say about 50 miles, 40 or 50 miles away from the assigned target. And they would, the big thing about H2S was you couldn't keep it on very long because it was a perfect thing for the night fighters to home onto. So the navigator there, he'd be looking at this thing, and as soon as he picked up maybe a big maybe a coastline or something, or something that was easily identifiable, and so they would then from there they would do what they just call a dead reckoning run to the last 50 miles. And they'd keep turning the HRS on and off, so that any night fighters who were in the area, they wouldn't be able to hold on. When they got there, they'd be up at about 25,000 feet. They would drop these parachute flares that would burst at about 15,000 feet and light up the ground, all just about like daylight. It was, a little, not real daylight, but kind of dusk. And so then we were underneath that by about 10,000 feet. And as soon as one of our, when we sent out on an operation, we'd send 6 mosquitoes as markers, and they would have 2 what we call target indicators, which are a bomb filled with napalm or something like that was flammable. And they would dive down from 5,000 feet down to about 1,000 feet, usually not straight down. There are no dive brakes on a mosquito, so if you went straight down, you'd pick up too much speed, probably, and you'd probably be doing over 500 miles an hour. So you sort of throttled back and dove at about a 45-degree angle, and when you got to 1,000 feet, you dropped your TIs. And
what types of speeds would you normally travel at, Bob,
about 350.
Okay. And then if they needed what would your max speed if you needed a?
400.
Be about 400?